Hello, everyone. I'm Dick Crippen, and I don't think this gentleman needs any introduction. Tom McEwen of the Tampa Tribune for many years. And Tom, both of us go back a long way, and we're getting pretty excited about this brand new stadium that's behind me right here, the Raymond James Stadium that's about to open. But before we go to that, we ought to look back at this grand old lady that stands right next to her. Boy, I'll tell you, a lot of memories. 30 years worth. You remember when it was first going up?
I remember coming out here every day to see how it was going. I brought Chris Schinkel out here. I brought Lindsey Nelson out here. We were so proud to show it off to people like that. I remember the dedication, because I had the joy and the pleasure of being the master of ceremonies at that little ceremony. And I particularly remember that in the background, over the crowd, were some USF students with signs saying, "We want football." And that was the first such cry.
Well, Tom, it was the University of Tampa that really played in the stadium first.
We must never forget that. Without the University of Tampa and its 7 home games to play in the old stadium for the basis for the feasibility survey, we would never have been able to get old Tampa Stadium built.
And so it was built, and with it the dreams of a birthing sports town. The University of Tampa hosted Tennessee in Tampa Stadium's first ever event on November 4th, 1967. It would begin an era of exciting college football that dominated the late 60s and early 70s. The final University of Tampa team had a quarterback who went on to become one of the premier receivers in the NFL, Freddie Solomon.
I was excited about being here. I was excited about being with the team. I was more excited about playing in the stadium. The grass was probably the best in the country. The stadium was state of the art, 30 years ago, and it was a great stadium. One of my fondest memories, probably is the fan support that we got back then. 40,000 people out there, cheering for you back then was really big for us. A lot of excitement. Football was fun.
Well, you got to be a real veteran to remember the Tampa Stadium of old, and that was one without those skyboxes, incidentally. But let's not get too far ahead of ourselves. The University of Tampa obviously was playing in that stadium, but there were other promises made, one being to the Gator fans that the University of Florida would be here.
It wasn't just the Gator fans, it was to the bankers. When we were doing the feasibility survey, Coach Graves promised to play a game here as often as he could. And in 1968, he played the Air Force here. You'll remember that game.
Oh boy, do I
ever. Full stadium, 50,000 people.
And the Falcon.
The Falcon.
The Falcon took off, flew 3 times around the stadium, and flew off. They didn't find him for a week, and when they finally found him, he was talking to the birds at Busch Gardens. But they did find him.
They did find him. The fella was, he'd still be there with his arm out, waiting for that Falcon to come down. But they did find him eventually. But
well, Tom, after that was all done and we got things going in the stadium, then the Tampa JCs, along with a guy named Bill Markham, came into the picture, and they decided, let's try a pro exhibition game and see what'll happen.
That was it. The first one was Washington and Atlanta, and when we looked up there and saw 42,000 people in the stands, I nudged Markham and I said, what do we have here? From then, it really took off. Exhibition games were so important to us. That was what Dan Rooney, chairman of the expansion committee, used as a main basis for coming here, that with the stadium. And Carol Rosenblum brought the Colts here for a full training season to play 3 exhibition games, and we sold the seats in advance. And he told me that over his dead body would anybody get a franchise ahead of Tampa.
And it was the success of those exhibition games that got the attention of the NFL. The league awarded Tampa Bay its 28th franchise.
But of course, the end zones weren't always at Tampa Stadium. It was not always a bowl, but there was a requirement put down by the NFL.
Part of the deal. We could not have gotten the NFL team had we not bowled in the stadium and gone to 72, 74,000 seats from 46. I know there was some opposition. One environmentalist said that if you have 72,000 people in this stadium at rush hour on a Friday afternoon, people will asphyxiate at the corner of Buffalo and Dale Mabry.
Well, despite that great fear, it passed, and they bowled it in. So Tampa Stadium was now ready for its own first NFL game with its own team, the Buccaneers.
Buccaneers, go Bucs!
May I say that we're here for one reason and one reason only. That's to bring the fans great professional football.
If these lockers could talk, what the stories would be that they could tell, Tom. There were a lot of happy moments, but boy, there were an awful lot that we remember that were just the opposite.
And I remember walking by one of these fellows after a game, and he said, "Tom, I don't have anything to say." I said, "Pal, I got nothing to ask you." And that was pretty much what we were doing in here after losses, wandering around waiting to get out. But these lockers right here were all the great quarterbacks, Testaverde, DeBerg.
A lot of memories, and some of them very good, because there were some happy times. I remember the first game they won at home, and that was against St. Louis. They just won in New Orleans the week before. They came home, played against St. Louis, and won. And remember what the fans did?
Yeah, they tore the goalpost.
I don't think they'd ever seen that in the NFL before.
No, that was a start for them. You're right, there's so many. I can tell you the record holder for long showers was quarterback Gary Huff. He'd peep out and see if the reporters were still here, and he'd hang in there for about an hour, and we'd finally all give up and leave. No quotes from Gary Huff.
And people forget the first quarterback on this team who was in one of these stalls, now at the University of Florida.
Steve Spurrier, of course. I asked Spurrier how badly he was beat up being the quarterback through those 014 seasons. He says, you'd be amazed. He says, I was not beaten up. I think they took pity on me.
We had a lot of enthusiasm, excitement. I remember we did win that exhibition game against Atlanta, 17-7, I think it was. So, heck, they put my picture on the cover of Sports Illustrated. The only game we won all year, that exhibition game. But it was a learning experience. Got a whole bunch of guys hurt. Leroy Selman got hurt, I think, the first game of the season or the last preseason game, something like that. He didn't play the whole year. But it was a humbling year, and we didn't win any. But as far as maybe preparing me to be a coach someday, maybe it was worthwhile.
But the last game played here will live on in memory. That was a playoff game, and the Bucs did win.
I think we all talk about that playoff win and the win over Philadelphia in '79. Those were the two most memorable games in this stadium, as I remember.
The electricity that was generated in the 1979 playoff game against the Philadelphia Eagles, that was such a unique environment for us as players and coaches to come to the stadium, and the old stadium there, and have all those fans there that had just created an electricity and energy that was unmatched. I'd never seen anything like that before.
Well, Tom, of course, you and I were in the press box. We stayed dry, but I think anybody sitting in the stands might well remember the game with Neil O'Donoghue making a kick in the rain that I don't think anybody will ever forget.
No, and Neil still lives in Clearwater, and it was indeed one of those great kicks, particularly in the rain.
And the video shows that water cascading down like Niagara Falls.
Like none I've seen here.
It's been unbelievable, and it proved the worth of the field because it still was good.
The field was never bad, ever.
Well, we're very happy to report that the last game that was played at what is now the old Tampa Stadium, and the last time the Bucs were in the locker rooms, they went out winners. It was the playoff game just last year.
I think my favorite memory would probably be the last game in there, being the playoff game, and just the big win, and then fireworks and all afterwards was pretty neat. It was good to go out on a winning note there and just have a big celebration after all the hard times that I'd gone through in that stadium. And it was a little hard to think that was going to be the last time, but I think it was a great way to end it, knowing that there's a lot of positive things going on, and we're going to start out in a beautiful new stadium.
Well, that was quite a playoff game that the Buccaneers were in. They've been in 3 playoff games. Gosh, this stadium's hosted almost that many Super Bowls.
Was hosted 2, and we have one more coming in 2001. 84, first one.
Boy, was that exciting. What a build-up to that. The whole community had pulled together.
It was a wonderful event. You remember the Raiders beat the Redskins, and the AFC didn't win again until last year.
Mm-hmm. That's right. It was quite a game, but it was a monumental game for this area because it really established this area in the NFL.
It established this, and it set a precedent. Everybody else modeled their Super Bowl efforts and productions after Tampa in 1984. That's no exaggeration. That's a fact.
But then there was the Super Bowl that was very unique. It's probably the most challenging Super Bowl put on by any community. This community did it. They did it in first-class style, but I don't think anyone will forget the moments.
No one will, because of the Gulf War, of course, because of the heavy drama and the people waiting in line. Can you imagine New York Giants fans waiting in line 2 hours without complaining to come into that game? Scott Norwood missed a field goal right down here that would have won the game for Buffalo. For me, in this stadium, the single most dramatic moment ever was right up on top of this press box. I was up there with the SWAT team before kickoff, standing there. We're all looking at the helicopters, the black helicopters. We're watching the flyover, all just waiting for somebody to do something wrong. Nothing went wrong. Whitney Houston?
Perfect. She couldn't have done better, and that rendition of the Star Spangled Banner still is the one that brings chills to me. Those are certainly great moments, and we'll never forget either of those Super Bowls as we look forward to the next one coming up after the 2000 mark. But those were not the only championship games that were played in this stadium.
Oh, not by a long shot. We've had high school championship games here. But we had the USFL championship game between Philadelphia and Arizona with George Allen and Jim Mora, the two coaches. I'll not forget that, significant as it could be.
And it was a game that we weren't too sure how the NFL was going to react to because they weren't real happy about the USFL playing here. But fortunately, all of that's passed under the bridge now. And